Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, all. It's Mitchell Warren from AVAC, and delighted to welcome you to another in our post-CROI webinar series. I'm going to give you a bit of background to this call, introduce a number of presenters, and then we are going to get moving right through the presentations, and I'll give some descriptions on how we hope to engage everybody on this call. But for those who either were in Boston last month for the conference on retroviruses and opportunistic infections, or who followed it from afar, you will know that oral PrEP, again this year, was a hot topic at CROI, as it has been for the last several years. And a number of sessions throughout CROI began to talk a great deal more about what we're learning in programs, lessons that are being applied and leveraged in a lot of different settings. And we wanted to bring a lot of that thinking, a lot of those ideas to this webinar, and make sure those resources were widely available to programmers, policymakers, advocates, as we think about the future of oral PrEP. So I'm delighted to welcome a number of colleagues here today. We're going to take us through a presentation about what resources exist, how we know where the world is with respect to oral PrEP in terms of some of the numbers behind programs, both globally and at country level, explore some of those resources in a little bit of detail, and then open it up for questions and comments. Want to make sure that everybody recognizes that this really is a crowdsourced exercise. We will present a number of resources that we know are available, and we know it because people have shared them with us at AVAC and through a number of partnerships, which we'll talk a bit about. But it really is not just crowdsourced, but open source. And so we really want to encourage people, both on this call and certainly afterwards, to identify what's missing, what needs updating, what needs correcting, and making sure that this shared resource is really advancing programs around the world. So that's the plan for today's conversation. I will say that throughout the call, if you are on the ReadyTalk interface, please do send any questions as we go. You can also do that via email at avac@avac.org. And then after the presentations, in about a half an hour or so, we'll give some instructions on how to unmute yourself to ask questions directly. But that is our plan for today, and delighted to welcome people from a number of different programs. I know many on the line have great experience in thinking about oral PrEP and both how to design and implement programs. But I'm delighted to open the call where we're going to move in just a couple of minutes to my colleague here at AVAC, Clancy, who's going to take us through a number of the resources that are available online right now. But before we do, we wanted to start where programs actually happen on the ground, and to really get some insights into what are some of the most pressing needs for programs, and what opportunities and resources they have found most useful. So we're going to start with two very brief inputs from East and Southern Africa, one from colleagues at Jilinde, which is now one of the largest oral PrEP programs running anywhere in Africa. It is based in Kenya, undertaken by JPIGO, and delighted to welcome Daniel Were to the call to give a sense of the needs on the ground before we get into how some of those needs are being addressed. So maybe I'll start first with you, Daniel, just to say a few words of introduction. And Daniel, you need to hit *7 to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Daniel, if you are speaking, we can't hear you. Well, maybe what I will do, the other perspective we were going to have, which maybe we'll start with while we try to figure out Daniel's connection. Let me hope that Definite Nahamo from PZAT, the Pangaea Zimbabwe AIDS Trust, who've been a longstanding advocate and research partner in Zimbabwe on a wide range of issues, including oral PrEP. Let me see, Def, if you're on the line, and maybe we'll start with you in Zimbabwe.
Hi, Mitchell. Can you hear me?
I can, Def. That's great.
Great. Thank you so much for hosting this webinar. It's a great place to be at this afternoon. So what I'll start talking about is how we've found this resource very useful in Zimbabwe through Pandia Zimbabwe AIDS Trust. So I don't know how many people on the webinar today know about PrEP Watch, but from my experience, when I've introduced PrEP Watch to some of my colleagues, some of our stakeholders, some of the partners we work with, the main questions that came up with is this like a free repository? Do you need to subscribe to it? Do you need to pay? Do you need to log in for you to access information? And the beauty about PrEP Watch is it's a free repository where anyone can go to if you need information on PrEP, and there's a whole range of information on PrEP, looking at basic information on what PrEP is, what does it do, how does it work, if you who's supposed to be on PrEP, is anyone eligible for PrEP. So we also have training manuals on training healthcare workers on how to deliver PrEP. There are monitoring and evaluation tools. There are risk assessment tools from different countries. There are also like frameworks to follow if maybe your country is looking at how to introduce PrEP. What are the basic steps that you can follow for you to introduce PrEP successfully in your country? So because there are some countries that have that have gone before other countries, there is now a framework to say these are the basic steps, which may vary from country to country, but they'll vary slightly. But the good thing is there is some sort of framework to follow if a country is looking into where do we start, because this is such a huge it's a huge concept. How do you break it down into smaller bits that smaller bits that you can take as a country and say, okay, we've done this first stage of the framework and we can go on to the next step. So in PrEP, on PrEP Watch, there's that framework that you can easily follow. It also tells you like the status of all PrEP rollouts in the different countries. And in terms of policy guidance, if you're struggling with, we want a PrEP policy in our country, but we're not sure where to start, it's a good place to go and look at what other countries have put in place, and then you see what's applicable to your specific country. Just to talk a bit about PrEP Watch, we've in Zimbabwe, we're in the process of doing developing our implementation plan for PrEP rollout and how to put PrEP to scale. And what we found helpful is we have demonstration projects that have been happening. There's PrEP rollout that has been happening through a specific clinics, through specific delivery models, but we didn't have national level PrEP manual for healthcare providers. And we were struggling. We're saying, well, we have another demonstration project that has been rolling out their own training manual, and another partner who's been rolling out their own training manual. So we sat down and we said, how can we have like a nationally representative training manual for healthcare workers? And the first port of call we went to was actually PrEP Watch, where you find there's the WHO guidance on training healthcare workers on how to deliver PrEP. We have the ICAP materials that are there. We have the Kenya materials that are there. We have South Africa, the Clinicians Society that have also posted their materials there. And we found that as a great resource to look at what has been incorporated in other training manuals and also incorporate it with what we have in country. And we're actually now in the process of coming up with a consolidated training manual for the nation. So I would end,
Oh, sorry, go ahead. That's terrific. I'm sorry, I just cut you off there. I didn't mean to.
Okay. That's also one more thing, Nicole, that I just wanted to highlight was I think as countries who are rolling out PrEP, we're struggling around how to measure adherence because we know PrEP is not for life. And I think PrEP would be a good place to have all the resources that are out there to measure adherence. Is it a person being on PrEP for 3 months, for 2 months? How do we best measure adherence? So getting those resources from other countries, what they've been using, I think it's a great opportunity for PrEP Watch to incorporate that resource for people to start looking at and then add on what they have. So I think that's what I just wanted to add, like the different measures of adherence around PrEP.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Steph. That was terrific. And we will be in just a minute going through many of the resources that Steph described in terms of where they are and how to navigate all of this on PrEP Watch online. But before we do that, Steph talked about really learning from countries that have gone through some of these steps. And I want to briefly turn to Daniel Waring, who I hope is now on the line, from Jilinde, a major PrEP scale-up program in Kenya. Daniel, are you on now? Ooh, Daniel, *7 so we can hear you. All right, we seem to be having a little trouble in Kenya, but I'll tell you what we'll do. I think what we'll work behind the scenes to try to get Daniel on, and in the meantime, what I think is best to move to Jack Clancy, who coordinates a number of activities here at AVAC, including the consolidation and cultivation of materials related to PrEP Watch, and to take us through a presentation to really look at what is the state of the field and what we might do with some of those resources. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jack.
Great. Thanks, Mitchell, and thanks, Daph, for that great introduction. So as Mitchell mentioned, I'm going to be taking us through this presentation today. We've chosen to break it into 3 sort of sections, 3 different resources that we think are going to be broadly really useful for people on this call, but I think it's going to be just sort of the tip of the iceberg. We have a short amount of time, so hopefully you're going to be able to go after this presentation, navigate to PrEP Watch and explore all of these things on your own and pass along the good word. So there are these 3 sections that we've broken the presentation up into. And the first one I wanted to start with is what we call our global PrEP tracker and our country updates. So this was sort of born out of a, I think as Mitchell said, CROI is a really good example. I think a lot of things were presented about how PrEP rollout is going, including number of initiations and number of people that have started on PrEP in different regions. And I think there has been some confusion. It's obviously very difficult. The landscape is constantly evolving. It's hard to track all of the different moving pieces. So this global PrEP tracker is really a response to that. We wanted it to be sort of a central repository where people can go to get a sense for, at the country level, what's going on. So, how many people do we think have started on PrEP? Where is PrEP registered? Where is it included in guidelines? And to be able to sort of look at it from a holistic perspective and maybe be able to compare countries and sort of get that large baseline for where we are with oral PrEP. I think we have found the narrative around oral PrEP is often, I think people have different perspectives. Is uptake low or slow or failing? And I think we don't necessarily have the answers to those, but we do want to provide sort of a baseline to be able to ground some of our stories in data. So this global PrEP tracker was a response to that. You might be wondering sort of what's our methodology for getting this. This is a large body of work. We are working with tons of partners. As Mitchell said, this is really a collaborative effort. On a quarterly basis, we send out a survey to all of the PrEP projects that we're aware of and ask them for a number of things, including their data on PrEP initiations. And we've also developed partnerships with governments that are rolling out PrEP or Gilead even in the U.S. So to really try to have a comprehensive view of what's going on with PrEP around the world. So it's on a quarterly basis, and I might note that this is not perfect, but we think it's better to have something that's close to perfect than to have nothing at all. So to sort of help orient you to where you can find this resource, here we're looking at the PrEP Watch homepage, and as you'll see sort of the red arrow on the top left, you can navigate to the country update section, which will take you here to this landing page and provide a bit of a sort of an overview for what the tool is. Obviously download here. And this is a screenshot, obviously not of the entire tool, but hopefully a good representation of what you can find when you download the PrEP tracker. So these are 4 countries we have. I think there are, actually, I don't have the number in front of me, but something maybe like 50 countries as part of the global PrEP tracker. And so I wanted to take you through a bit of what we have in the spreadsheet. We'll move quickly because I know we don't have too much time. But if we start on the left, we have 2 numbers, and you'll notice that there are ranges. As we said before, it's not an exact science, but the 2 numbers are, one, the number of people that we think have actually initiated on PrEP. So we're not tracking the number of people that are currently taking pills, as we think that would be pretty difficult. So this is the number of people that have enrolled in a program and have initiated on PrEP. We're also tracking target numbers from programs that are implementing PrEP. So as you know, when a program starts, they may set a target number of clients that they want to enroll and initiate on PrEP. And we found those numbers at the beginning to be a bit more accessible. So I think this also provides a nice sort of comparison point to look at what we think is actually happening, the number of people that we think have actually been initiated versus what the target numbers are. And then if we move sort of across the screen, you can see information about what types of programs are happening. So are they demos? Are they clinical trials? What programs are planned? As well as what populations those programs are targeting, which I think is really important information. And then we have service delivery settings and funders. If you move all the way over to the right, we have some more information about guidelines and registration. Again, I think a lot of people have sort of had questions about, is Truvada registered there? Is there a generic registered in this country? And here we've tried to do our best to have sort of a comprehensive list, which I know is constantly changing. But this is sort of provides a good sense of where drugs are registered. So I would encourage you all to go check this tool out at a later date or right after this webinar. There's a lot more there, but we're really excited about it. And as we will continue to say, this is a collaborative effort. Numbers are not perfect, and we already have been getting a lot of updated information from partners who have said, oh, you know what, you don't have that quite right, and we encourage that feedback because we want it to be as accurate as possible. So moving on to the second part of this section, we also have country updates pages, which are specific pages with a lot of the same data that you'll find in the PrEP tracker, but a little bit more tailored towards that specific country. So actually you can locate to these pages either by clicking on the map on the home page. Each of the highlighted countries will take you to the specific country page, or you can go to the country updates page and click on one of the links that I've highlighted in this slide. So when you get to that page, this is Kenya as an example, you'll notice a lot of the same things from the PrEP tracker. But again, it's just sort of meant to be a place that you could point somebody if you wanted to specifically reference what's going on with oral PrEP in Kenya or Botswana or something like that. So this, I've also highlighted a couple things you could find on this page. So this box that I've highlighted here, if you were to click it and download it, provides this sort of nice snapshot of all of the ongoing, planned, and some of the completed PrEP programs in that specific country. So again, I think a nice highlight. This here is the second half of the Kenya page, and something I think is really useful and would encourage others to send in resources when you can, is we have these country-specific resource sections. So down below where it says resources for Kenya, we've sort of combined or collated a number of resources that are either, we think, useful for implementers in Kenya, or resources from Kenya that other countries may be able to benefit from. So a couple that I've highlighted here. One is this interactive timeline for the journey of PrEP in Kenya. So it's a pretty cool Prezi presentation that is interactive in nature and takes you from, sort of the beginning with trials and research all the way through to national scale-up, and I think it's a really great resource. A couple other things we have on the page. We have the policy framework, which you could locate here. And then this last one, just another example of something specific to Kenya. There was a country situation analysis that was done before rollout, which helped in planning for that initial PrEP introduction. So I think a lot of great resources here, and obviously that was for Kenya, but we have those pages for a number of other countries as well. So that was the first section. Would love to hear feedback during the Q&A session, but I'm going to keep moving along. So the second section that I wanted to highlight was this page called PrEP Resources, and it was built similarly out of I think the need for the PrEP tracker. Obviously, PrEP rollout has really picked up recently, and I think we were noticing that, and Def actually alluded to this at the beginning. Many programs were going out and remaking their own tools and resources. Obviously, you can't necessarily just take a tool from a certain location and replicate it elsewhere, but I think a lot can be learned from from programs that have come in the past. So we set up this PrEP Resources section to be sort of a central repository, again, for tools and resources from existing PrEP programs. So that rather than starting from scratch, if you're starting a new program, you could come here and sort of see what others have done and maybe even use them in your own program. So I'm going to take us through some of these examples, and I was going to hopefully go to Daniel a little bit during this section, but maybe Daniel, we could just save it to the end, and hopefully we can get your mic working a bit more properly. So as you'll see here, we've broken it up into, I think we have 8 categories and then sort of a key resources section. I think that this list can expand, and you could probably cut it in a number of different ways. This is the way that we have chosen to do it. So the first one is sort of our catch-all resources. We were noticing people returning to the website and using the same sort of resources, and they're sort of like our top choices or top hits. So in this page, you can find things like a map of the regulatory status of TDF FTC. I think some really great infographics about sort of a global look at PrEP introduction, so that details things like the number of demo projects going on across the world, the number of governments that have MOHs that have incorporated PrEP into national programs, other things like that I think could be useful as sort of recurring updates for people to continue to see. So moving down the list, I think a lot of these are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much. I would encourage you to come back and take a look in depth, but I'll buzz through these just to give you sort of a sense for the amount of resources that we have, and then also, as we continue to say, to encourage you to please send us things that we're missing. So if we start sort of at the highest level, we have this section called Global Guidance, and Global Guidance obviously helps set expectations, define priorities, and pave the way for national action. So in this page, you will find resources like these from PEPFAR, from the WHO, from UNAIDS, sort of those higher level guidance documents. If we take it, and of course we link to partners' websites, so here, for example, we'll take you to the WHO site. Going one step down, we obviously then have the national level policies and guidelines. I think we have, as more countries continue to push for PrEP inclusion in guidelines, we found it, I think, helpful to be able to reference the guidelines and policies from other countries, whether that's pull language or to see how, the phraseology that was used or what sorts of the inclusion criteria that were used. So this is an attempt to sort of pull together all the different level policies and guidelines from the national level, so that if you are either reviewing your own guidelines or writing for the first time PrEP into guidelines, you would be able to come here and reference these. So the list is obviously longer than you can see on screen, but this will give you a sense for some of the things that you could find there. So I've just highlighted, for example, Botswana, and you could click through and you could get to the guidelines. So Continuing along, and another section that Def referenced, so I'm really glad that it has been useful for you guys, Def. That's the exact purpose of PrEP Watch. So oral PrEP training materials, I think, is a huge lift for somebody to go out and write their own training material. And obviously, you can't necessarily pick something up from South Africa and apply it everywhere, or Kenya, or anywhere else. But I think a lot of the foundational materials can be used and applied in other areas. So again, our aim here was to combine those and to have sort of a reference point when programs are starting out. So for example, here we're looking at ICAP put together sort of a template and a customizable training curriculum, and so we have links to those and sort of an explanation for how it can be used. Again, similar for MNE materials, similar sort of setup. I think MNE and Def referenced this again. MNE, I think, is something that we've been hearing a bit more about, and I think it's a bit tricky right now, as there isn't obviously one sort of standardized way that we're doing MNE for oral PrEP. I think different programs have different requirements and different capabilities, and so there's not necessarily a standardized way to do MNE, but our attempt here was to, again, show sort of the different ways that it's being done, and we'll continue to update this as more guidance comes out and more tools come out. So, and I wanted to just take a moment. So this, the resource that I have on the screen is from GEMS, which is a program that's part of the MPI network. And I think it's just a good example of PrEP Watch is only as good as our partners help us to make it. So there are so many great tools and resources out there that we would never know about if our partners didn't send them to us. So GEMS is, for those that don't know, has worked to put together a toolkit to assist policymakers, healthcare workers, and labs to develop and implement drug resistance monitoring within PrEP rollout. So on PrEP Watch, there are job aids, fact sheets, MNE guidance for MNE indicators from GEMS. So a big thank you to those guys for passing along their resources. Finally, I think another big one is the demand creation resources, and we've continued to get more and more requests for IEC materials and different posters and things like that. So we're trying to sort of do a similar exercise and pull together some of the great resources out there. Here's an example of a full PrEP communications landscape analysis that was done for Kenya. Again, could be a great resource if you are looking to do this in your own country and want to see what's happened elsewhere. We also have pulled together a number of posters and IEC materials, job aids, as you can see on the screen right here. And of course, these are specific to particular locations, but I think they can really give a good sense and hopefully some ideas for what's possible. Finally, this last section called Implementation Resources. A little bit of a catch-all, but these are some resources from implementers that we have found really, really useful. So here in this arrow, we've collected a bunch of tools from demonstration projects, and this was this is an earlier effort. You can see on the left the different categories that we've collected. But similarly, in the nature of PrEP Watch, programs were going out and designing all of their own SOPs and risk assessments and things like that, and we wanted to have sort of a central place where you could come and see what else has been done and build off of previous experiences. A couple other things just to highlight from that I think are great resources. We have sort of a blog series called Lessons from the Field, which contains interviews and other stories from early PrEP rollout. I think it's a great contrast to some of the harder tools that we have. It's sort of a great narrative of what's been going on from people that are actually working on projects. So I would encourage you to check those out. And another example of that is there's a video series which was led by our colleagues at LVCT Health through the Options Consortium to capture some of the largest lessons from their PrEP demonstration project. And it was broken down into 6 modules. You can see 4 of them here on some of the key issues that they saw as either facilitators or barriers to their oral PrEP rollout project. So I think another great sort of alternative to the hard tools, but would really encourage people to go check those out. So this last section, and I'm going to spend the least amount of time on this, although that does not mean that it's not worth the time. Again, the Options Consortium developed this framework, which we call the Framework for Scaling Up PrEP. And the idea here was to provide sort of a step-by-step how-to for programs as they are beginning to launch their oral PrEP programs. So as you can see, there are 5 steps here, and there are many, many sub-steps within each of the 5 pieces you can see on the screen. And I'm not going to go through them in detail, but really wanted to highlight that this resource is here because I think it's a great place to start if you are, I guess, any place on this along the framework or along the timeline. It intends to provide sort of a, what is the process, and then here are some resources that could help you get started. So I'm going to just show you a couple things, but we'll encourage you to go back and look at a later time. So if you click through, you can access from the home page the framework, either on the left or by clicking on the icon, and you'll find yourself on this page. Each of the 5 have their own, so we're going to look at creating policies, plans, and budgets. And as you'll see on the right, there's sort of these sub-steps that I mentioned for creating policies, plans, and budgets. And each one of those steps has a number of tools and resources, as well as sort of a narrative as to what that would entail. So there's tons and tons of content. We're obviously not going to go through that today, but wanted to give you a bit of a sense of what's there. So for example, at the beginning, you might want to identify who your priority populations are going to be with your PrEP program. So there's sort of a paragraph about what this entails, and then a number of examples. So a few situation analysis from 3 countries, as well as a sort of a template to go and do your own situation analysis, as well as some other helpful resources from partners. So this is just one of many, many, many steps, and I would really encourage you to go take a look at another time. Just one other quick example. This is the 4th step, promoting demand and uptake. Again, you can see sort of those sub-steps on the right side, which again will sort of follow the same format of giving you sort of a how-to and then a number of resources. So you can see down below we have IEC materials for programs with sex workers, as well as men who have sex with men, and some other toolkits. So I think a great tool for programs that are sort of kicking off or scaling up. So, and I just wanted to wrap it up with a couple things. This was obviously just sort of, I hope, the tip of the iceberg, and I hope gave you sort of an appetite to go check out all the different tools and resources on PrEPWatch. It can be, I think, a bit of an overwhelming site for people at times, so I hope this was a helpful introduction. We are always really excited to talk to people about PrEPWatch, so if you ever have suggestions or questions or things that you want to add, we would love to talk to you about it, email or phone or anything like that. And then I just, again, want to reiterate how thankful we are to have all of the input from partners and people that send us resources and tools. It really makes the website what it is. So we have a few acknowledgments. The site is funded through a couple projects, one through the Options Consortium, which I have referenced a number of times, funded by USAID, and the other is through the Prevention Market Manager, which is a Gates-funded project. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Mitchell for a moment. I don't know if we've had questions come in, or perhaps Daniel has been able to figure out the connection, but I'll stop there.
Great. Jack, thank you so much. That was a fantastic tour of a very dense site, as you said, and we look forward. There are a bunch of questions that have come in, and I'll get to them in just a minute, but perhaps first let me see if Daniel Wary from the Jilinde project in Kenya can speak to how to make things really happen on the ground, and hopefully, Daniel, we can hear you now. So *7 to unmute if you have not already, and let's give that a chance before I turn to questions.
I hope you can hear me now.
We can, Daniel. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, and sorry about the hitch at the start of this webinar. So I think for us, this has really been an exciting opportunity as we have walked this journey of PrEP introduction in Kenya. And just by introduction, my name is Daniel Were, the project director for Jilinde, which is one of the largest PrEP scale-up programs in Kenya. And currently, we are talking of almost 12,000 clients so far initiated on PrEP within the past 1 year. And I must say that for us, PrEP Watch has really been a significant resource as we walked through this journey. We do appreciate, of course, that Kenya hosted 2 PrEP demonstration projects that provided a basis of local evidence to support a lot of the thinking around crafting a national scale-up program. But that notwithstanding, we still did note a number of critical resource gaps and needs, which for us, PrEP Watch became more or less like a toolbox that served to fill those gaps. So starting with some of the implementation needs that we have seen over time, the first one was around advocacy, and particularly when I want to pinpoint this is as we introduced PrEP in the country, a lot of the stakeholders we engaged had a lot of questions, for example, around evidence from the clinical trials. And we realized it would have been a lot of time taken, really a very time-consuming exercise to go and conduct a literature review of all the evidence from clinical trials. So this, for instance, now PrEP Watch became a one-stop shop for us, where we would be able to see a lot of the evidence from clinical trials which had been coalesced together. And that actually became our go-to site as we did a lot of the stakeholder engagement, drawing on all this evidence that is put together and using that as we engage stakeholders to discuss what is the evidence around around PrEP. Secondly, what has also been very important for us is as a central repository of resources, particularly what is the global guidance. For example, we do understand there have been lots of guidance released, particularly from WHO, and it has been a one-stop shop for us also to have a quick look at what is the global guidance. And this was particularly important as we developed the national PrEP implementation framework for Kenya. And on the same plane, I want just to talk about the fact that the PrEP Watch provides an opportunity for us to bounce off ideas and see whether part of the things that we are thinking actually resonate across other countries. Because the experience in Kenya for us has been a case of building a boat as you ride it at the same time. So it became actually quite imperative along the way as we designed, for example, the MNE tools to be used in the national program. Then it was essential that we try and resonate that with other existing tools. And we found a lot of useful resources for this from PrEP Watch. As we developed training materials and training curricula for training health service providers on PrEP delivery, we also found a lot of useful guidance from PrEP Watch. And similarly, just as I talked earlier on, as we were working on the national PrEP implementation framework, it became very important. For example, some of the gaps was, for example, estimating resource needs. How do we go about it? I think some of this became important for us to try and also just figure out what have other countries done so far. So I must say for us, this has been a very useful resource in the process of implementation, and quite often we do reference a lot of stakeholders and a lot of our implementation teams to PrEP Watch as a useful resource to guide lots of their implementation efforts. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was a hard stop. I'm not sure if we lost you, but I'm really grateful for that. And maybe what I'll do is turn to some questions, and we'll certainly want Def and Daniel and Jack to engage in these. A few off the top, and again, let me just encourage everyone at any point to continue to put things in the chat feature. You can email continuing at avac@avac.org, and in a moment I'll go ahead and pause and open the line for people to unmute themselves and join. But a few quick ones, I think maybe, Jack, just to you to clarify a few things. One is a couple people actually wrote in already with some updates. Someone from New Zealand said, I have an update on the New Zealand.
Oh, great.
Clearly someone's tracking it quite late in their day there. Where can they send updates?
Great question, and thank you to whoever is in New Zealand sending updates already. That's fantastic. So people can send updates to AVAC at avac.org is sort of the primary primary email address at which we receive updates. There are also some specific tools. So, for example, on the global PrEP tracker, there is a call-out box at the top that says, "With updates, please email," and there's an email address there for our colleague Laura Fitch, who leads the outreach process. So, when in doubt, the general line is AVAC at avac.org. But in addition, there are a few particular tools that specific people run, and there's guidance for how to reach them.
Great, and I just put on the screen the country update page, and it has the little click for let us know, because as we said, this information is only as good as what you all, both creators of and users of, provide us. Related to that, speaking of using of, someone asked the question, do I need to get special permission to use any of these documents, and are they copywritten?
Another great question. So everything that is on PrEPWatch, we have gotten permission from the partner to put it on there. So I think you are very welcome to use whatever is publicly available on PrEPWatch, but would encourage you to acknowledge the source or to cite the source, thank the source, just sort of as a good practice. But everything we have up there, we intend for others to use.
And we would certainly encourage you to do that if you do adapt it and use it in a slightly different way to make sure that the best acknowledgement would be to resubmit it back to PrEPWatch so we can include it in this growing archive of materials. So that's great. Thanks so much, Jack. One of the things you said, you've used the word PrEP a number of times in this call, which is not surprising, and we talk about PrEPWatch, but someone said, is this just oral PrEPWatch, or is it just TDF FTC PrEPWatch?
Mm-hmm. So pretty much everything you will find on this site right now relates directly to oral PrEP. However, if you are on the site, there's a navigational page on the far left called About HIV Prevention. And if you go to that section, there are links to other technologies that are either in the pipeline or already available. And it will take you off of PrEPWatch to avac.org and will give some more information about those technologies. That said, I think we are definitely looking to expand. So in that section, we have just built and launched a page on the dapivirine vaginal ring specifically. And I think a lot of so that page contains information and resources specific to the ring, but obviously as the ring sort of progresses and hopefully receives positive approval and progresses along the introduction process, I think a lot of the tools and resources that exist on PrEPWatch, while they are oral PrEP specific, will be useful for the ring. Might need some more adaptation, but I think as we progress and when we get there, we will certainly look to integrate a bit more. And then, of course, with injectable PrEP and other things coming down the pipeline, I think it would be a similar story.
Great, and just to also say that the project's both options and especially the HIV prevention market manager are really looking at how oral PrEP provides a platform for other forms of PrEP and prevention generally, and certainly PrEPWatch does that too. The good news, I think, for all of us is there are clearly some people on this call who are users of PrEPWatch, because here's someone who wrote in and said, I really like it, but I have trouble finding things on PrEPWatch. What do you recommend I do when I can't find something?
Another great question. So there are a couple things I would point out. There's a search box up in the top corner which you can utilize, which is sometimes works well and will find you what you need, and sometimes it will not. I would encourage you, if you think there's something there and you just can't find it, always happy to reach out to someone at AVAC, reach out to me, and we can help direct you. this would maybe be another good point to reference. We have heard from a number of people, the site is great, but it's really dense and it's difficult to sort of sort through all the different resources and different pages. We're currently in the process of trying to make it a bit more user-friendly and sort of make it a bit more natural, the navigation of the site. So we are looking into, a potential database for resources as well as sort of a site reorganization to help make it a bit more accessible. So if you can't find a resource, always happy to have questions come in via email or, any way in which you can reach out.
No, that's great, and I think a lot of the questions that have come in recently are helping us in real time redesign and reorganize some issues on the site. So stay tuned for that. Another question, and you referred to some of this, Jack, but much like it's just about oral PrEP, and you made it clear that it's evolving into PrEP more broadly. But another set of questions came in asking about different populations. Like, is this about PrEP and gay men and other men who have sex with men? Is it about adolescent girls and young women? Is it about all of that? And can you give a sense of some of the population specifics there?
Mm-hmm. So it's not specific to one population. I would say it probably the tools and resources are probably representative of how the programs skew in the real world. So, there are a lot of programs targeted towards adolescent girls and young women or sex workers or men who have sex with men, and so those tend to be a lot of the resources that we have. But I think a lot of it is generalizable as well. So like the framework, for example, that's obviously not necessarily specific to one population or geography. It's meant to be relevant to many populations and in different locations. And obviously, when you drill down and you look at some of the resources that are tagged at each step, they are population specific. And I would say the same thing on the PrEP resources page. The resources that we have are obviously from programs that exist, and a lot of them are not necessarily just a general program. They're targeted at a specific population. So I guess to answer the question, it is both.
Great.
Yeah.
No, it's super helpful. So it's really about the process, not only about the population.
Correct.
Related to that, someone said, there's a lot of information there, but someone also flagged, but there are also clearly still a lot of gaps about PrEP, particularly for adolescent girls and young women. And are there resources not only about how to scale programs up, but also are there resources on PrEP Watch that create opportunities for dialogues between researchers and civil society or policymakers and civil society, particularly where there may be gaps of information, not so much the presence of information?
Yeah. So I would say yes and no. I don't think PrEP Watch is necessarily facilitating conversations. It's not the facilitator of conversations between researchers and civil society. But that said, I think a lot of the things that we have on PrEP Watch and a lot of the things that I didn't highlight on this webinar are meant to equip civil society partners and implementers with information and tools to be able to have those conversations with researchers and advocate for things that they want to. So there's a section called About PrEP, which is actually the first area of navigation on the homepage, and there you'll find some of sort of the basic fact sheets and other sort of breaks down the science and breaks down the trials and things like that are meant to sort of equip civil society with tools to be able to have those conversations. So while I don't think it's actively facilitating that link, we hope and intend that a lot of these resources are helping to make those conversations happen. But I think a great point, and I think probably an opportunity for us to strengthen it a bit more. And maybe just one last thing. There is actually in the PrEP resources area, and I did not focus on this in the presentation, but there is a section called Advocacy Resources, which contains some information. I think, again, we can probably always make it better, but it's there, and hopefully it's getting used.
great. Yeah, and the Advocacy Resources is up on the screen now on the far left links both to some global resources to help do advocacy related to PrEP, as well as links to some country-specific advocacy efforts to do a lot of that linkage between researcher, policymaker, and civil society. And some of that also is on the AVAC website writ large. One of the things, Jacques, that came in, it's a great question here. Obviously, a lot of information comes to us. We put a lot of it on, but a colleague asked, how do we ensure data quality control in terms of what we get from partners? And some partners have a tendency to give inaccurate figures in order to attract more funding, perhaps. So a perspective on what do we do? Is everything make it on the website?
Really good question. And again, I don't think I have a perfect answer. I think we do our best to curate what goes up on PrEP Watch. And I think there's a couple different levels to that. So at the really specific, we do our outreach to projects to help inform the global PrEP tracker to understand numbers and funders, and I think we really do try to take a close look at those numbers. And obviously, we're not on the ground, we're not in clinics, so it's a bit tricky for us to be able to make the call whether something is accurate or not. But we've been working with a lot of these products for a long time and have, I think, good trusting relationships from what we can tell, and so tend to trust our partners with what they send. Then there's the other levels where we often will get someone will email us and say, here is a slide deck on XYZ. I think it would be great to have on PrEP Watch. And sometimes, and those don't always make it up on PrEP Watch. It's not meant to be a site that has everything in the world. There are some resources that maybe just don't belong on the website and are great for certain contexts, but I think at a certain point you lose utility when you have too many things up there. So we do our best to sort of curate what goes up. I think we can always be better at that, but that is sort of the process we go through when something comes in.
No, that's great. It's a classic trust but verify, and I think one of the things too that just so everyone's aware, we update things a lot. So actually just yesterday, a colleague emailed and said our regulatory map didn't show India as a place where Truvada had been approved, and in fact, there was the map is relatively accurate because Truvada, the branded product from Gilead, has not been approved in India, but the generic form of TDF-FTC has. The map itself is marked as Truvada registration, so that's accurate, but it's not a clear depiction when generics are approved when the original drug was not. So it really made us think we need to update our materials to be clear about that. So again, this is constantly evolving, and we know there's some inaccuracies, and we're trying to correct those, and all of you become our great editors and sources of that. I want to pause for just a second to turn to any questions on the line, but one that came up, someone was really happy and intrigued to see this great slide you put up. They noted it, that I'll put back up on the screen, that shows all these great materials for demand creation, including this very striking one from Kenya right in the middle. Someone asked, with the demand creation, is this just an archive of demand creation materials that exist, or are there tools and resources to help create demand creation materials?
Mm-hmm. So it's both, and we didn't quite have time to get into this too deeply, but there is both a section that has examples, so the things that you see on the screen, and there are more of them on the site, so sample IEC materials from existing programs. But then also, if you look at the framework for scaling up PrEP, one of the sections is called I believe it's called promoting demand and uptake, and that's more of a how-to. It's not going to be your sole source for creating, a communications campaign or demand creation campaign for your program, but we hope that it's a starting point, and it sort of takes you through that narrative of what are the steps to do it, and then provide some templates. And I might also say, I know our options colleagues are actually in the process of developing something called the accelerator, the communications accelerator, and it's meant to be a bit more of a a template for programs to build their own communications campaigns. So I think it's a really exciting tool, and it's going to be linked to PrEP-Watch, and it's going to be sort of a digital interaction tool. And that will be much more of a how-to with examples and templates. And so we're super excited about that. And I think we'll be launching in the next few months.
Great. Jack, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and just pause for a minute and see if anyone wants to hit *7, unmute your line, and ask any questions or highlight any issues you think need to be covered here. And I'll also allow that for Def and for Daniel to weigh back in with any thoughts they might have. So *7 to unmute.
Hi, this is Nita here. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. One of the things I wanted to ask about is that I've learned recently that the access and adherence to oral PrEP is facing similar challenges to clinical trial teams where participants have had challenges with issues of adherence. And I was wondering whether that information in terms of lessons learned can be made available on the PrEP-Watch website. Thank you.
Thanks. Great question. So we do have some materials like that on PrEP-Watch. I think we could always have more. But a couple that again, apologies for being so brief, but that I briefly went over. There's the lessons from the field page, which I think is from some of those earlier demonstration and clinical trials that provide more of sort of that narrative, what were the challenges and how could they be overcome, that I think, some of them are probably site-specific, but a lot of them could translate to larger scale rollout. And then the second one, I also breezed by, but those videos from our colleagues at LVCT Health really does go into detail about what some of those challenges were, and a lot of them are the same challenges that we've seen with larger scale rollout. So I think those start to capture some of those lessons. We could always do more, but we certainly are trying to do that, and would love to work with anyone that would have either existing resources or wanted to work together to maybe write a blog or create something that accomplishes that.
Great, Anita, great question.
Thank you very much.
And also to say that a website's only as good as the materials that are there, but websites alone, as good as they might be, won't necessarily radically transform programs. And so one of the things that we're looking at for issues, just like what you described, Nita, are where there's a community of practice around a particular issue, whether that's around adherence issues or around demand creation or around monitoring uptake and continuation, the kinds of things that Def described. We certainly are looking for that, and again, that might happen offline, so separate from the website, but we really look forward to those topics and questions being brought to the fore. I'll also say one question did just come in just to quickly answer. Someone asked about experiences with continuous quality improvement, and I will say that a lot of the monitoring and evaluation section that Jack described is very much in that continuous quality improvement approach. It's not, much of this is not about monitoring and evaluating after the end of a project, but rather how do we monitor and evaluate in a continuous way to improve programs. So I just wanted to flag that very quickly. And again, any other questions or comments? *7 again as we get close to the top of the hour. So maybe I'll quickly just see if they're still on it, if Definite or Daniel, if either of you want to give some closing thoughts in terms of not just the materials here, but what else needs to happen going forward. Any last thoughts?
Thanks, Michelle. So this is Daniel. I think so far the PrEP-Watch provides us with a useful resource to reference and get lots of information. But I think I would just touch on a point that was mentioned by one of the contributors, and probably that is part of the task going forward. because for a program like Jilinde, we are generating a lot of lessons around PrEP scale-up, lessons around around the VRS, around retention, around building communication, and many other aspects. So probably going forward would be to see how do we get additional lessons into PrEP Watch, and also see how we can link PrEP Watch to additional resources at the different program levels for reference.
Great. Daniel, thank you. Def, do we still have you on in Zimbabwe? All right, I think Def may. Oh, Def, are you? If you're there, we can't hear you. *7.
Yes, I'm on, Michelle.
Go ahead. Any last thoughts?
No, just to reiterate that this is such a useful resource, and I would also encourage people to visit this. We found it very useful here at Zimbabwe AIDS Trust in Zimbabwe. We found it a very useful tool, and we also continue contributing to this platform. But it's a useful tool which I would encourage everyone to take some time to look through. Thank you.
Great, Def, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us. PZAT is a core part of the Options Consortium and a great partner on a number of initiatives around HIV prevention in Zimbabwe, and really want to thank you and Daniel in Jilinde and Japaigo in Kenya, who've also been just terrific partners in really helping us all learn more quickly and at scale. So thank you. Jack, any last thoughts as we close out?
No big thoughts other than just to, again, say we love to talk to people about PrEP Watch. We want it to be really useful, and it can only be as useful as, if we hear from partners. So we love hearing feedback, positive or negative, and we'll continue to, try to make it better. So thanks for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Jack, thank you so much. Great work in all of this, and whether it's about tracking progress with respect to uptake through the PrEP tracker, the resources across any number of areas of thinking about programs and operations, or thinking very strategically in a stepwise approach through the framework, we're really excited to see this as a crowdsourced, open source resource for all. And again, not only around oral PrEP, but we are excited with the prospect of bringing in both the dapivirine ring and in years to come, long-acting injectable cabotegravir as well, as these programs evolve. And we look forward to working with all of you to make sure the resources are not just available, but that the resources are adapted and used, because that's what this is all about. But thanks all very, very much. And again, thank you to our partners and all of you for moving this work forward. Stay tuned. We'll be announcing the next series of webinars shortly, including just actually exactly a month from today, May 18th, is the annual recognition of HIV Vaccine Awareness Day, and we will be doing some updates looking further upstream in product development from PrEP into what's happening with HIV vaccines. So stay tuned for those, and we look forward to continued conversations across all of HIV prevention. Thanks again, Jack, Def, and Daniel, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Cheers all.